Saucier, this is a video lesson for pre-algebra on interval notation. An interval is a range of numbers between two endpoints. We have seen intervals in the forms of graphs on a number line. A number line is a graph of one dimension. We have the origin at 0 and a tick mark. We can give an example of an interval between the two endpoints, -3 and 4. And we'll put closed dots at -3 and 4 because those two endpoints are included in the interval that's graphed here. This is a graph of an interval. That's not necessarily the notation that we're talking about. We do want to point out that these are called the endpoints. And what we've shaded in between is the numbers in between those two endpoints. So the interval is a range, in this case, between -3 and +4, all the numbers in between, including -3 and 4, because we have closed dots, filled in dots at those two endpoints. We have a notation for this, so we don't graph it, which takes more space and time. We could refer to the same interval by writing its endpoints. -3 is the lower one, that's where the range starts. And the greater endpoint at 4, with a comma in between. To finish up this notation for this interval, I need to put it in brackets. And I'm going to use square brackets because a square bracket is what you use to include the endpoint. So this square bracket close to the -3 means that -3 is part of the interval. And all the numbers in between -3 and 4, and the square bracket means that this 4 is also included in the interval. Let's see another example. We're going to start with a graph, just as we did before. A number line. The tick mark at 0, it's the origin. We'll make a tick mark at 5 and a tick mark at -2. We're going to put a closed dot on the 5. 5 will be an endpoint, the higher endpoint. But we're going to put an open dot at -2. And the difference between these, the closed dot and the open dot, as we've learned from the past, is that a closed dot means that you can be on the number line at that point, at 5. An open dot is a placeholder. We can get close to it, but we are not going to include -2 in our interval. An open dot means that we're going to go all the way up to -2, but not ever be at -2 or include it. So here we have two endpoints. Shading in between means that we're going to highlight all of the numbers in between -2 and 5. That's a part of our interval. We can write this down by writing the endpoints as we did before. The lower one, -2, then a comma, and the upper endpoint at 5. We have to put them in brackets. The 5 is included. It has a closed dot, so we use the square bracket. But now, this -2 with an open dot, we don't want to include that in our interval. So we use a rounded bracket, or a common parenthesis. So we can see the difference between these two intervals when we include an endpoint and when we do not, how the notation for it changes. This notation means the same thing as the graph. It's just a shorter way of writing the same concept. All of the numbers between -2 and 5, including 5, but not including -2. We can make a note that we use a square bracket for closed dots, and it means to include. And we use a parenthesis or a common rounded parenthesis for open dots, which means to not include the number at that location. Let's give one more example. We're going to have another number line, tick mark labeled at 0. This time we will put a tick mark at 2. And a tick mark at 8. An open dot at 2, an open dot at 8, and we shade all the numbers in between. This is a graph of an interval. Let's write the notation. A lower endpoint at 2, comma, upper endpoint at 8. Now, which brackets, which parentheses do I use? They're both open dots. So we use parentheses on both the 2 and the 8. This is notation for all of the points between 2 and 8, but not including 2 and not including 8. And unfortunately, we'll make a note, this looks like an ordered pair, the kind of thing that we would graph or plot on a 2-axis graph, like an X and a Y location. It looks like the same notation, but it's not. It's using similar notation to express a different concept. And we have to be careful of this. This is uncommon in math, that this looks like an ordered paired point. But in this case, it's an interval. So how do you tell the difference? Well, when you're doing your math, you have to think, if you see this, what is the larger context? What is this being used in to represent? When you're working a problem where it asks you to graph on 2 dimensions, it's going to be a point. When a problem involves a range of numbers or a set of numbers or an interval, then we would read something like this as an interval. All the numbers between 2 and 8, but not including 2 and 8.